In this video, I'll give you a toolkit of the best French transition phrases so that you can speak confidently in any situation. Before we start, I'm going to tell you a story about trying to decide what to eat while roaming the streets of Brussels, Belgium. The only catch is that this story has very few transition phrases, so it kind of sounds awkward and choppy. At the end of this video, we'll put your knowledge to the test by filling in the blanks together.
Pendant mes vacances l'automne dernier, j'ai visité Bruxelles. Un jour, je voulais manger quelque chose de délicieux. Il y avait beaucoup de vendeurs de frites belges. Je voulais un dessert et j'avais déjà dîné. Je suis passée par une chocolaterie. Il y avait un bon arôme. Je n'en voulais rien. Les chocolats belges sont magnifiques, mais je voulais quelque chose de chaud. J'ai vu un magasin de gaufres. J'ai vu la vitrine avec toutes les gaufres, avec du chocolat, des fraises, de la glace et toutes les belles garnitures. J'ai pris ma décision. Avant de faire la queue, je devais vérifier que j'ai eu des espèces. Ces petits magasins n'acceptent pas les cartes. Si tu as 4 €, c'est assez. Les gaufres étaient si délicieuses. Tu peux choisir les garnitures toi-même. J'ai choisi des fraises et du Nutella.
Let's start with some everyday transitions. Of course, if you want to express anything from your opinion, you need to have words for that. Selon moi, or à mon avis, are 2 ways to do that in French. There's actually lots of different ways to express your opinion, so these 2 are just some to get you started. Malgré, despite. One common mistake with malgré is people try to combine it with que, but there's no such thing as malgré que. If you're trying to do this, you might be trying to say a subject pronoun afterwards, such as il or elle. But just remember that with malgré, you have to follow it by a noun, like malgré le soleil, on s'amusait bien. D'ailleurs, by the way. If you ever want to add some information into something you're saying, d'ailleurs is a subtle way to do so. It helps you add information without drawing too much attention to the thing that you're adding.
Pour celles et ceux qui me connaissent peut-être pas encore, d'ailleurs c'est l'occasion, si vous n'êtes pas encore abonné à ma chaîne, de le faire juste ici.
Parce que, car, because. Parce que is of course a given, but car is another good one to add to your dictionary because it's so short and sweet. The technical nuance between the 2 words is that car means for, like I couldn't come for it was late. But as you may guess, this distinction is rarely important. Now this first section of transitions is already going to get you very far, and I bet once we go through the whole list, you'll start realizing that those random filler phrases or indiscriminate sounds that you're often hearing in French media are actually filler phrases and transition words. A prime example of this is du coup. Though it does technically mean so, it seems that it appears after every other sentence in French just as a casual filler. You can add this in basically anything you're saying, and it's a great all-purpose transition to know. Du coup, you should know some formal transitions as well, should you find yourself reading documents, watching videos, and of course for those oh-so-awkward job interviews. Lorsque, quand, when. Quand is great for everyday situations, but you also might come across lorsque if you're watching videos or reading documents. Though they are relatively interchangeable in many situations, there are situations where you can't use lorsque. For example, when you're talking specifically about instances of time, you have to use quand. C'est quand ton anniversaire. You can't say c'est lorsque ton anniversaire. It seems that a better definition for lorsque is at the moment when. If we take our previous example, it doesn't really make sense to ask, it's at the moment when your birthday. But there are situations where it does make sense, such as dis-moi quand tu arrives or dites-moi lorsque vous arrivez. Both work, even though the second is a little more formal. De plus, in addition. De plus should be quite an intuitive one, and the plus should help you remember that this is used to add more information. Even though it's short, it is quite a formal transition, and you'll hear it more in scripted dialogue versus everyday speech. Another way to add more information is en outre, and the difference between en outre and de plus is that the outre suggests that you're adding different information. The information that follows doesn't have to contradict what you said before, it just has to be a different piece of information. Cependant, however. Cependant is a great one to know, especially if you're trying to improve your written French.
Cependant, contrairement aux apparences, ces philosophes avec toutes ces sciences, que l'on appelle parfois déterministes,
Néanmoins is a synonym to cependant, and a more nuanced definition for this is nevertheless. I think it's quite easy to remember because néanmoins, nevertheless. Facile. For nuances like quand versus lorsque or néanmoins versus cependant, I really like using FluentU so that I can watch some real-world videos and take a look at some sample sentences so I can really understand the difference between these similar words. One of the ways that your brain actually learns language is through pattern recognition, so the more input and videos that you show it, the more your brain will recognize on its own which words appear in what contexts, and FluentU is really handy for that.
C'est hiver. Moi j'adore ça en fait, comme on est en hiver.
Here we can see how en fait flows in a sentence, and we can even click on it to see the definition and hear it spoken one more time. You'll also see any grammar tips that are relevant to the phrase or word, and in this case, the FluentU app wants you to know that the T or the T in en fait is pronounced, even though it looks like it should be silent. If the video is going a little too fast for you, you can hop over to the transcript section where you can take a look at the dialogue at your own pace. Here we see another filler phrase or transition, c'est-à-dire, which means that is to say. This one's pretty easy to remember because it's essentially the direct translation of English. If you want to give FluentU a try, there's a link to a free trial in the description, so check it out to boost your language learning journey. Now, don't worry if those formal transitions got you a little bit jumbled up. Let's move on to some easy chronology-related ones that are quite intuitive and will help you tell great stories that flow together. D'abord, on commence avec d'abord, which means first of all. Like I said, pretty intuitive, and this is a little more natural than saying premièrement, which you might be inclined to say because it has the word première in it. Ensuite, next. Ensuite is quite popular to continue anything you're saying, and it can be used in pretty much anywhere in a sentence. You can use ensuite to begin a clause or a sentence, and it can also be combined with other transition phrases like alors ensuite on ajoute la farine. You can also put it at the end of a sentence like qu'est-ce qu'il a fait ensuite? Puis, then. The difference between puis and ensuite is that ensuite is a little more specific while puis is just general. Take note that you can't use puis at the end of a sentence, like j'ai une pause à midi, tu peux m'appeler puis? To mean, can you call me then? In this case, you would have to say à 7 heures or repeat à midi. Enfin, we have enfin, which means finally. Again, pretty self-explanatory. So I remember when I was in French class, I'd be sitting there thinking, do French people actually say these things? So for the next few phrases, let's watch a little cooking video and see how they appear in everyday speech all the time.
Et les bases liquides. Donc dans ma farine, dans mes 250 grammes de farine, je vais ajouter donc mes 60 grammes.
Donc is short and sweet, and even though it technically means so, it's another one of those all-purpose transitions that appears very frequently in everyday speech. The chef actually uses donc so many times throughout the video. Donc, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. En revanche, par contre. On the other hand, the difference between en revanche and par contre is that en revanche is used to introduce information that's positive compared to your previous point, whereas par contre is used to introduce information that's negative compared to your previous point. The use of these two terms is a little debated. Some people say par contre should never appear in written speech, while others only use one over the other. And that's why I like to watch videos to see how words are used rather than just rely on their dictionary definitions.
Donc épaisse, mais sans plus. Par contre, vous allez pouvoir le constater à l'image.
Puisque, comme, since. You may know the word comme as like, such as rouge comme une tomate, but it can also be a synonym for puisque, which is since. Some people say puisque, while others say puisque, like the chef in this video.
Eh bien, 200 grammes de lait, le complément, puisque je n'ai mis pour l'instant que la moitié du lait.
One thing to note for puisque is that it can't be used with notions of time, like since last year. For this, you would have to use depuis. Pour que, so that. Even though we learned donc for so, in order to say so that, you have to use pour que. And one thing that's tricky is that the definition of pour has little to do with the actual meaning it has in pour que.
Alors, après un laps de temps de repos d'environ 1 heure, temps nécessaire pour que la pâte se repose,
Just like pour que, there's a whole slew of words that uses a word plus que to create a transition. Ainsi que, as well as. Ainsi que can be used to add information in a sentence, like il y aurait de la musique ainsi que les hors d'œuvre à la fête. Après que, after or when. If you're confused on the difference between après que and après, think of après que to mean once something has happened. For example, on va commencer la musique après que les invités sont arrivés. Avant que, before. Similarly, you must be wondering when do you use avant que versus avant. The difference is a little difficult to explain, but in general, avant que is used for situations or scenarios, while avant appears in more declarative sentences or simple questions. Avant que must also be followed by le subjonctif. Tant que, as long as. Tant que la glace est au chocolat, ça marche. Transitions like this get tricky because, like some of our previous ones, the meaning of tant doesn't really have anything to do with tant que, and you'll actually see tant appear in a lot of different expressions to mean different things. Bien que, even though. Bien que is another one of those phrases where bien doesn't have anything to do with the meaning of the phrase. One way I try to remember this is that there's no word for even in French, such as even though. So when you're trying to say even though, try to remember that and resort to the phrase bien que. Other ways to say bien que would be même si, or our next transition, quoique. With a meaning slightly different than bien que, quoique means although. In this situation, it's one word, but if we separate quoique into two words, it becomes something completely different. Quoique means no matter what. The thing is, both of these are pronounced the same, and they do both take subjonctif, so it's going to be up to the context for you to figure out which one's being used. However, this distinction is especially important in written French.
Quoi, quack, quack. What goose squeak though?
Dès que, as soon as. The last one on this list is dès que, and the accent grave on the E makes this pronounced a little bit different than dès. Because this might be hard for you to hear, let's take a listen to the difference on FluentU.
Dès que.
I still have 2 more transition phrases to share with you, but at this point we've learned so much that I think we're ready to revisit the Belgium story and fill in the blanks together. I'll try to explain my reasoning for including the transitions, and for a lot of the blanks there's more than one option, so try to follow along and fill in the blanks yourself.
Pendant mes vacances l'automne dernier, j'ai visité Bruxelles. Un jour, je voulais manger quelque chose de délicieux. Il y avait beaucoup de vendeurs de frites belges. Je voulais un dessert. So this part is showing a contradiction. Even though there were a lot of vendors of Belgian fries, I wanted dessert. So I'm going to use bien que. And to use bien que avec il, you have to delete the e and add an apostrophe. Bien qu'il. And bien que takes subjunctive, so this avait has to change to eu. Bien qu'il y ait eu beaucoup de vendeurs de frites belges, je voulais un dessert. Et, we're adding information, so d'ailleurs, j'avais déjà dîné. Then I start a chronology of events, so we can use d'abord, je suis passé par une chocolaterie. Il y avait un bon arôme. Je n'en voulais rien. Il y avait un bon arôme. Je n'en voulais rien. I'm showing a contradiction once again, so I can use here malgré. And instead of saying il y avait, I'll change it to le bon arôme. And we can combine this into one sentence. Malgré le bon arôme, je n'en voulais rien. Les chocolats belges sont magnifiques, mais je voulais quelque chose de chaud. So this sentence is fine as is, but I like to use transitions to make it sound a little more sophisticated. So in this case, I'm going to use quoique, since we already used bien que. So quoique les chocolats belges soient magnifiques, because this is quoique, which takes subjunctive once again, so we use soit, magnifique. We can delete this mais. Je voulais quelque chose de chaud. This is next in the chronology of events, so we'll use puis. Puis, j'ai vu un magasin de gaufres. Dès que j'ai vu la vitrine, avec toutes les gaufres, avec du chocolat, des fraises, de la glace et toutes les belles garnitures, j'ai pris ma décision. Avant de faire la queue, je devais vérifier que j'ai eu des espèces. Ce petit magasin n'accepte pas les cartes. So this is another place where we can add a transition to combine 2 shorter sentences. And so I'll use car to say because. Car ces petits magasins n'acceptent pas les cartes. Si tu as 4 euros, c'est assez. To make the sentence more advanced, instead of the si, we can use tant que here to say as long as. Tant que tu as 4 euros, c'est assez. Les gaufres étaient si délicieuses. I'm adding information once again, so I'll use de plus here. De plus, tu peux choisir les garnitures toi-même. Donc, or so, donc, j'ai choisi des fraises et du Nutella. Voilà, c'est fini, bon travail.
Ok, dernière section, on en est tout libre.
Let's sum things up with our last section. Bref, In short, anyways. Bref is a great phrase to sound very natural in French, and it's essentially used how English speakers use basically. It's great if you tend to go on long-winded tangents about things, and you can say bref to sum up your main ideas or restate your main point. Autrement dit, in other words. Autrement dit is a great way to restate something you said previously or provide clarification in case something is complex or a little bit difficult to understand. The truth is, you're going to hear these 30 French transitions come up in conversation and media all the time. Not only are they great for expanding your vocabulary, they help you speak more confidently because your sentences sound more natural, less choppy, and you sound way more native. If you're looking to hear these transition phrases used in context, we have a great video on the best podcast to learn French. And if you want some extra pointers on how to use some of these transitions, such as how they're used with le subjonctif, there's a free PDF linked below on 23 French transition phrases.